Order.
I'll call the public safety meeting to order.
Supervisor Mask has been nice enough to let me lead this today, so we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Public comment. Kim, do we have any public comment? All right, moving on to 4 operational functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. Discussion and possible action by Health and Human Services or Public Safety. Discussion regarding 2026 annual budget development and policy recommendations from the committee, including review of the mandatory discretionary program document and discussion of rates and fees. Turn it over to Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So again, this is a recurring agenda item to allow board members to provide input early and often throughout the budget building process relative to what programs or services we offer. It's the first policy question, so if there's something new you want us to take on and provide that direction, or something you think we should evaluate the impact of perhaps doing less of or stopping, what service level are you looking for us to provide our programs and services, and then lastly, at what cost? I can give you a real brief overview on the cost piece. We are getting closer to having solid numbers for our implementation of our wage study that the board directed through the administration work plan this year. Looking at those wages, we're probably in this, the scales themselves need to move about 10%, which isn't surprising based on the length of time that it's been since we last did a wage study, which was 2022. So if you think about the increases in equalized value you've seen on the county board since 2022, you've had 12%, 11%, 9, and 9 the last 4 years. So costs have gone up. The same thing is true, without moving those scales, the wages have grown in the market. What that means for costs for us is probably going to be in the neighborhood of 7.6 to 7.9% to implement. Why that's important for rates and fees, the direction from the county board relative to your budget assumptions was to tie those two things together. 1, move forward with implementation of the wage study, which we're working on building that plan, but then 2, tie the fee increases for the programs where we do charge fees to that commensurate rate. The one part I'm having staff work on in addition to that is trying to find out with the projected increases we're anticipating for insurance, health insurance benefit, what would that total blended rate look like? So that's probably going to be, again, somewhere certainly north of 7.6 in terms of blended rate, but probably in the neighborhood of 10% when you include all those things together. WRS contributions increased this year through the state. As I said, we know health insurance as a market is looking between itself an 8% to a 10% increase. Other counties, if you've followed, one of our neighboring counties at a 22% renewal quote. So trying to do all those things with respect to fees. So that's my brief update. And I know there was discussion last time about discussion following up on the task force work about what is the county's role with respect to homelessness. So if that's an area you want to discuss relative to budget, certainly happy to answer any questions.
Questions by the committees, either one. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I do want to talk about homelessness, and last that I heard, we were going to be kind of examining a position of maybe project manager. Is that still in play? Or are we out of the budget for that?
No, I think that's a great question. Certainly, we don't have that position right now in Marathon County dedicated to that work. So if that's something that the county board, and specifically this committee, wants me to include into the budget development, I would greatly appreciate that direction. That is consistent with the task force's, what I believe will ultimately be our direction, which is that examining the Pathways Home model from La Crosse and tailoring that to what would work with Marathon County and, of course, the city of Wausau after we develop that strategic plan. But that La Crosse model is exactly what you said. One of the key components that the county of La Crosse delivers in that partnership with the city of La Crosse is that coordination, that project management position. And I do have some ideas as to how to do that, because I figured that was coming.
Would it be in order to have some sort of presentation on that for the September meeting? Or what are your thought
Presentation
process on what you just talked about?
I would just build it in the budget. So if there were a motion to continue with, to incorporate a project management position relative to addressing homelessness in Marathon County into the 2026 budget, that's what I would put into the budget.
Supervisor Cavelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Limmer. I would like to make the motion to incorporate that into the budget as far as a project manager goes for homelessness.
Motion on the floor. This is just for Health and Human Services. Okay. Second. Any further discussion? Conway. Okay. With no, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion, go. We have 2 nays?
I heard 3.
How many do we have? You're not on our committee, it's just Health and Human Services, I'm sorry. With, so 2 nays. Okay. All right, with that, we will go to, anything further on A? If not, I'm going to move to 4B. Anything further on 4A? If you
Does public safety have to vote on it too, or is one enough? We're good? All right,
It's from the task,
Okay.
from the task force.
okay.
Okay, then we'll move on to 4B, discussion of possible action by public safety to forward to the county board for consideration. Nothing on that. All right, with that, we'll move to 5 educator presentations and committee discussions. Why are we all here today? I'm your NACO delegate for National Counties Association, and it seems like every couple of years they have a pet project when you're at NACO. Things of the past we've done have been opioid, which ended up with a lawsuit that we got involved in, obviously, to get some money for the opioid addiction issue. It was also for mental illness. When inmates were getting into the jail, there was another time that Supervisor McEwen and I had several joint meetings dealing with what we did for keeping inmates medicated once they're incarcerated. This year, the one session I had a breakout session in was youth justice, looking at proactive approaches with diversion so that kids don't become a standard user of the jail system and the corrections facilities, I guess, and getting them before they get into the system. So I thought it'd be a good idea to see what Marathon County is currently doing, what our process is. And with that, I talked with Administrator Leonard, I talked with Chair Gibbs. We got this together, talked with the powers that be, Sheriff's Department, Social Services, and that's where we're at. And that's why, so we're gonna go to the facility today. We cannot go to the secure part because of, they are underage, obviously, so you can't just go in that area, but we'll go in the, what's the area called? The dockside. And we'll just to the one side of the facility, we can't go to the other side. Krista said it would be about a half hour. I told her she gets 20 minutes because we have to get over there yet too. So with that, I would just turn it over to Krista.
So, I know we have a presentation prepared for you. I do usually try to be a conversation about your tour, it is at the letter C side. Which is gonna be out there currently, that was also really good.
Okay. So do you not, it might be an issue? So would there be any objection to us having the tour a different day? We do have a conflict in the facility today. It'd have to be Thursday. So would there be a conflict, or would there be any objection to doing this on a Thursday when it's more open to us down the road, whether it be September, October, in the near future? Any objection? With none, then we'll just we'll re-agendize that for a tour only. So, all right, with that, I will turn it over.
All right, so as Chair Boots shared, it asked for a presentation in regards to. How's that? There we go. Okay, I'll start over. Good afternoon. I'm Krista Jensen, the director with Marathon County. Appreciate you having us here today, and we appreciate Chair Boots' request to learn a little bit more about youth justice and some of the restorative justice programs and our preventative programs. And so I've invited our experts from social services in youth justice to talk a little bit more about that. So I'll introduce to you today Becky Bogan. She's our youth justice supervisor at Marathon County. Becky has been with our agency for a long time. 24 years. All really in youth justice. And then we also have Greg Jen with us today, who's been with our department for 10 years? 11 years, excuse me, all in the realm of youth justice as well. So they're going to share a little bit with you about what it means to have an intake through youth justice, what options they have when they do receive a referral at youth justice, and then also what that intake could look like through secure detention. So sometimes when we say we want to understand intake, those mean different things to us. The first stop is intake into the youth justice system, and then there may be an intake into a placement, there may be an intake into, and that could be a foster home, a group home, a secure detention facility, residential treatment, etc. So they'll explain a little bit more about that process, and then I know we have some of our secure detention staff here that can answer any questions, as well as our district attorney, who really we collaborate fully with in all of our recommendations for when we do receive you through that youth justice referral process. So, and then I will also have the ability to share with you a little bit about the Wausau Police Department. You have some handouts. They have implemented a restorative justice program in 2025, and so we've been able to have a lot of great collaboration with them on what that program looks like to prevent those youth from coming into a youth justice intake at all. So I'm going to turn it over to Becky and Greg, and I'll see you in a little bit.
So as Krista said, I am the Youth Justice Supervisor. Greg Jen is our intake worker, and you've been doing intake now for, 6-7 years?
At least.
Okay. And so Greg's going to first go over definitions, and we're going to just do a real high overview of the program, but there will be time for questions should you have them.
So first I wanted to go over a couple of the terms that we use, so when we're explaining things, you have a clear understanding of what we're talking about. When we receive a referral, that is law enforcement sending us charges on a youth that they have had contact with. As far as diversion, that can happen at any point in the youth justice process to attempt to become or prevent them from becoming further involved in the system. And intake is when I would meet with the youth and a parent, hopefully both parents, to discuss the charges that were sent to us, along with what the most appropriate resolution or my recommendation for what the most appropriate resolution would be. And a deferred prosecution agreement is ultimately an admission on the youth's part that they did something that they shouldn't have and that they are going to follow a set of rules. After a certain amount of time, if they're able to follow those rules, the agreement would go away and the charges would also go away. If they are not able to follow those rules, the agreement could be revoked, and then at that point, the court process could start, depending on how things went. As far as pre-referral diversion, we don't have a whole lot of influence at this point. We have not received a referral, so we don't actually have jurisdiction to make a recommendation on that referral yet. That more lies with the law enforcement. Some of the options that we do have are if the officers would reach out to myself or our unit to discuss what might be appropriate in that matter. That's an opportunity for potential diversion. Previously, restorative justice was used. That was a partnership with Goodwill. They would meet with the kids, talk about the impact that they had and what they can learn from that. That is no longer available at this time. That partnership or Goodwill decided that they could not continue that at the beginning of the year.
End of last year, yeah.
Okay. And then another way that some kids are diverted from the youth justice system are school resource officers working with the schools to find alternative consequences. They refer youth to the Wausau Police Department restorative program, a truancy court, and municipal citations are other ways that youth can be diverted from the youth justice system.
I want to take a moment and just talk about the youth assessment and screening instrument. And this is important because the state of Wisconsin Department of Children and Families in 2018 began to roll out a statewide assessment. Marathon County was one of the first counties to volunteer in that rollout. So we've been using the YAZI, as it's called, Youth Assessment and Screening Instrument, since 2019. And what it does is it focuses on a youth's risk to reoffend and then protective factors. What do they have going for them that might help them stay out of future trouble? So although the state requires that we use this, I want to be clear that it's not our only decision-making factor. We use the social worker if we have an open case. We use social worker discretion, Greg's knowledge, his experience, and then we also receive other information. We send out a report to schools to find out what's going on with truancy, how they're doing academically. So we're using all of that information when we are making decisions about how to proceed. The big thing here is the Department of Children and Families has been clear with us. We should not be widening the net. So what that means is kids, when we do this risk assessment, they can come in low risk, they can come in moderate, moderate high, or high risk. And that's, again, chances of them reoffending. And what we are being told very clearly is if a youth is low risk, we should really take a hands-off approach with those kids. That those are kids that either they're going to have good families who are going to be able to support them and help them make better decisions, or they've got a lot of protective factors going on. They're involved in community activities, they might be doing well in school, they have adults in their life that are healthy supports for them. And so that is one of the things we really look at when we're doing these intakes is what do we believe their risk is for a reoffense? And so things that it measures are, like I said, school, their attitudes, their family support, do they have mental health issues, AODA issues, and then just like respect for law enforcement and abiding by community values.
Once we receive a referral from law enforcement and social services, this is the point where we would have the most, I guess, diversion opportunities. Some of the things that we do use to divert youth, as I mentioned previously, used the restorative justice program through Goodwill. If the referrals in regards to possession of THC, we have created a THC diversion program along with disorderly conduct and sexting diversion. Counsel and release is another way to divert youth from becoming further involved in the youth justice system. That is ultimately, I would hold the intake with the family, discuss the what happened, why it happened, and feel like it has been or is being addressed at that point, and no further action is necessary. We also have online education programs available to us, along with the deferred prosecution agreement, which I mentioned earlier.
So one of the other things that we have when youth are going to be coming into working with a social worker is what services can we provide to the youth? We have things like our own in-house intensive support services. We have 2 workers who meet with kids, meet with families, help support their school education, help teach them pro-social skills, or they're working on those risk factors that I talked about that the YAZI instrument is indicating that need to be worked on. We do a lot of referring out to various services. It's psychiatric services, therapy services, programs such as Children's Long-Term Support, comprehensive community services. And then also just looking at things where we can get creative. We sometimes have kids do community service. We have kids do apology letters where we work through that with them. As Greg mentioned, we do have some online resources that we can utilize. And then we have, of course, our Youth Opportunity Center, which we just celebrated a one-year anniversary in June, which is there to help provide structure for kids, programming for kids, and hopefully develop some of those skills, either pro-social or help them understand where their thinking errors are getting them into trouble.
So moving on, we're going to go over 2023 referrals, 2024, and then where we're at up to this point in the year. In 2023, we had 385 total referrals. These are the percentages of how they were addressed. At this point, that probably doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but we'll hopefully explain that a little bit more. Of the 4 most frequently referred, as you can see, disorderly conduct is usually or always the highest referral that we receive. That's why we did some work on the disorderly conduct diversion program. All other offenses that would include trespassing, false imprisonment, child exploitation, recklessly endangering safety, harassment, possession of drug paraphernalia, possession of child pornography, resisting and obstructing, and any other referral that we would get besides possession of THC, and other assault is referring to batteries. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Marathon County is the 10th most populated county in the state of Wisconsin. And based off the 15 largest counties by population, this is where Marathon County would rank in regards to the amount of cases or referrals that were closed, offering the 3rd most deferred prosecution agreements out of those 15 counties, and referring the 7th fewest to court. Moving on to 2024. There was a 14% reduction from 2023. Becky and I discussed why that was, and we did not know. Again, the most commonly referred charge was disorderly conduct. Possession of THC, I believe, went up a little bit in 2024. And then again, out of the 15 largest or most populated counties, we ranked 7th with the most referrals diverted or closed, tied for 4th, offering the most deferred prosecution agreements, and tied for 7th with the fewest amount of youth sent to court. Moving on to 2025. That is where we're at, a 9% increase, so it has been busier this year than it had been last year. The remaining percentage are referrals that have yet to be addressed. And then to date, Marathon County has closed or diverted the 11th most referrals, offered the 4th most deferred prosecution agreements, and referred the 4th fewest youth to court. As far as being proactive and diverting youth from the youth justice system, when we began doing the disorderly conduct diversion program, Becky had asked me to keep stats on various factors. 2 of those factors were mental health diagnosis and prior CPS involvement. Out of the 40 or 50 kids that went through it, 97% had either a mental health diagnosis or prior CPS history. Many of those had both. To be truly proactive, I believe that these concerns need to be addressed before the referrals start to take place. Some of the services that can help with that, the School Counseling Consortium, can start meeting with kids as the schools start to notice, hey, this kid is struggling in this area or that area, which has been a big help and also relieves the parents' duties of having to transport them. So that's been great. The problem is that the spots are somewhat limited and there aren't enough counselors to provide that service for what the need is. The restorative justice program was also very beneficial in helping kids understand the impact that their crimes had on people. That was something that could happen before being referred or after being referred. The other problem that we sometimes run into is that some parents are not proactive about getting their kids into the appropriate services early enough. And at Child Protective Services, their involvement can be limited due to statute.
Let me just make sure that we're clear on the deferred prosecution agreements. When Greg chooses to enter into a deferred prosecution agreement, we call them DPAs. These are usually kids who are coming in, being referred into us for the first or second time. Or we've had a case closed for a while with them and it's a minor offense. So then they come in, they talk with Greg. He gives them a nice speech about making better decisions, but they have to be willing to comply with the request, or they realize that they will end up having to go to court. So it's really a first and second chance for most kids, those DPAs. If the case is going to court, I should back up. So anytime we get a law enforcement referral, we make a decision and then it gets sent over to the district attorney's office. They review all of our decisions. They can override our decisions. We could be sending it saying we think it should go to court, and they can send it back saying, you guys might want to consider a deferred prosecution agreement instead. Or we can say we would like to do a deferred prosecution agreement, and they say we think that this is more serious and we need to see it proceed in front of the judge in the court. I'm proud to say that I would say we are in agreement with one another 99% of the time. We have meetings together, we talk about cases. If we're not quite certain where they might fall on criminal activity or a decision we're making, we will reach out and we'll do that collaboration with them. That's also really important for families, because if a family takes their time to come in and meet with Greg, and Greg says, I think we can do a DPA, we don't want to have to come back and say, well, we're sorry, you can't do that anymore. And then that creates conflict between families and courts and families and us. So we try to be very cognizant of that. If the case is going to court, though, the DA's office will file a petition. Things will get set for an initial appearance, so they go before the court commissioner. Then there generally is one pretrial, if not more, where the district attorney, the public defender, and the social worker are coming together. Public defender and the district attorney talk about what will those charges be. Will they be pled down? Will they stay the same? How many does the kid have to plead to if there's more than one? The social worker will make their recommendations on what services are necessary. And then from there, we get to disposition. Sometimes we will do what's called a consent decree. They can go for 6 months to 12 years. There's conditions. Oh, what did I say? 12 years. Yeah, 1 year. 1 year. Thinking 12 months. 12 months. So the nice thing about those are that it doesn't go formally on the youth's record. It can be dismissed if they successfully complete that. They're not adjudicated delinquent. However, if they do go to adjudication, that's a formal record for that youth. And another difference is that with consent decrees, we don't sanction kids. However, if they do get adjudicated, we have the ability to sanction them. And this is where the violation of court order comes in and where secure comes in. So if a youth is violating their order, oftentimes the judge will give us what we call electronic monitor days. They will impose and stay that. And what that means is as long as the youth is doing what they need to do, we don't need to put the monitor on them. However, if they're violating, that is one option for us. We can put them on the monitor. Judges will usually give us anywhere between 60 to 120 days, depending on the youth, the number of times the youth has come back before the court, and on the crime itself. We also have our Youth Opportunity Center that we will have youth go to instead of sanctioning them, to provide them with that structure and that support. We have what's called 72-hour holds. The board approved this many years ago, and this gave us the authority, as long as the court made it part of their order, that we could take a youth into custody for up to 72 hours as a consequence hold, instead of possibly referring that charge to court, depending on what it is, or that they violated their court order. It helps get youth's attention. It helps hold them accountable. or we can also do an investigative hold. We don't need to use the full 72 hours. Oftentimes we don't, but it is a way to hold youth accountable and get their attention. And lastly, we have sanctions. Sanctions are when we go back before the court, we make the court aware of how the youth has been violating. The court can order 10 days for every violation. And oftentimes, one of the things we do to encourage youth to make better decisions is we'll ask for 5 weekends. So that the court will say to the youth, if you do what you need to do, the department has the authority to tell you that you do not need to go to secure for that weekend. And that's just a natural incentive for them to make better decisions. However, if the youth does go to secure, either through a TPC, then what we have to do is we do an intake with them. We go over their rights. We talk with them about why they made the decision. Some of them will talk with us, some of them won't. And then we are required to be before the court the next day. And the DA's office is working on filing a petition at that point in time if there's new charges. If there's not new charges, then we're talking with the court about the actions that brought them before the court. Generally, they're very serious situations where we're viewing community risk to be a concern. And then from there, like I said, we go before the court. The court makes a decision whether the youth is going to remain in secure detention or be released, and what conditions need to be in place if they're being released. And then I'll let the expert in the back of the room, if you have questions, speak to secure detention. So that was our high-level overview. Do you have questions for us? Yes.
Was the restorative justice program defunded? Why is it not in operation anymore?
It's
I
not
can
a-
speak to that a little bit, Becky,
Okay,
if
go
you
ahead.
want. Yep. So the restorative justice program used to be ran through Goodwill. We contracted with them, and at the end of 2024, they determined that that program no longer fit with their philosophy of what Goodwill was going to do. So then we were in a position to determine what's our next step. We had conversations with law enforcement, and that's the handout that you have. The Wausau Police Department did implement a restorative justice program, and you can see what some of the requirements are, what some of the offenses are in the handouts that I provided. They weren't able to be here today, so Melinda Pauls did supply these for me. So we've had quite a number of meetings with the Wausau Police Department as well as with our schools to talk about when there are first-time offenses, how can we prevent those from coming in through youth justice, the formal system, for Greg to do an intake? Because we knew if our restorative justice program went away, that was going to increase Greg's volume of intakes, and we likely weren't going to be able to manage that volume with the one staff that we had. So Wausau PD did work to put an restorative justice program in place. So essentially what happens if a youth has a violation in Wausau, whether or not they're a resident of Wausau or not, whether they're a resident of Marathon County, honestly, or not, they can be referred to the restorative justice program. So law enforcement would make that decision that instead of sending a referral to youth justice intake, Greg, that they would make the referral to the restorative justice program. Typically, those are nonviolent offenses, traffic violations, THC, vaping, maybe a low-level battery. And then if they're accepted into that program, what happens is they attend a 4-hour course on a Saturday morning with law enforcement officers. They do community service as ordered by the judge and are responsible to find that community service on their own. And then they have a once-a-month check-in with the, typically the school resource officer for the following 6 months in order to provide them some of that education on how their crimes impacted the community, law enforcement, the public. They often have to do apology letters. And so that's really preventing them from coming in through the formal youth justice system while still providing them resources and support for the crime that they did commit. The reason the schools were involved in this is primarily Wausau West and Wausau East, is one of those schools had a program that they followed for violations that occurred during school or athletic code violations, et cetera. And so they had a policy that guided, depending on the behavior, what the infraction might be at school, how they might address the concerns. They also have some education that they can provide virtually, some support groups, et cetera. And so we met with both of those schools to make sure that they were running consistently between the two, that you couldn't go to Wausau West and get away with a behavior that you couldn't get away with at Wausau East, et cetera. So moving into the next school year, they will have the same philosophy around the same behaviors, the same infractions, what that means, how many offenses you can have before that referral would be made to a law enforcement officer. So done a lot of work with our community partners to hopefully prevent the referrals from coming into the formal youth justice system in lieu of not having that restorative justice program that we used to have, where schools would really make a referral to Goodwill. It would completely skip us, and then Goodwill would provide those services. The one piece I would say that we're missing, because we don't have that contract, is for the youth who are post-dispositional. So they are in youth justice, they do have a court order, and we were using some of that to provide victim offender conferencing, where the victim and the offender would come together sometimes to talk about what that impact looked like and provide an apology. So we are still evaluating if we want to engage in a contract for that portion of restorative justice when they're already in youth justice and that victim offender conferencing component, moving forward and finding the right person to do that. Right now, our social workers are engaging in a lot of those conversations with victims and their potential offender.
Thank you. You have 2 more of those handouts, do you?
I have one more.
We'll share.
I have 2 more. Who needs them?
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Supervisor Cavelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the presentation. I really liked it. The Youth Opportunity Center, I know some of us had an opportunity to go visit that and take a tour. I think it was last year, year and a half. Really liked that facility. How is that going, I guess, as an update? And then do you need any support from us to be able to further any, I guess, preventions or anything else that we can help with?
I think it's going very well. We're at a 1-year anniversary in June. We've had some obstacles to overcome with some staff hiring, but we have 2 excellent staff right now who are very eager about the programming. I would say the only area that we might need support in moving forward is we've had a grant through DCF that has helped to fund some of this. So it's helped to fund some of the programming we've bought, some of the training we've been able to provide to our staff, and that grant will end at the end of this year. We've got the money in the budget to run the YOC, but there may be a need for some additional dollars in the future, but we will do our best to manage with what we have.
Okay, thank you. And a follow-up, I know that a couple of slides up there, I was surprised to see the THC use in youth. And I know part of our Health and Human Services Committee strategic planning is to help prevent some of that. What kind of resources are needed to prevent some of the THC use in youth?
Let me start. One of the things I want to say is we were very fortunate through our DCF grant to have dollars to use lived experience. And we have right now an actual social worker who is a therapist out of Eau Claire who is doing our lived experience groups with both high-risk kids who are really using a lot of THC and possibly other drugs, and then our low-risk kids, she also works with them to help them understand why not to get involved in that. And then we also have, as we said, some of those online resources. And that is an area that our social workers do talk with kids about, learning about coping skills. And Greg also does a really nice job of addressing that in his intakes. And I'll let you speak to that.
The most common theme that I see when I'm meeting with kids who have been referred for possession of THC is mental health concerns and not either being able or willing to address prior trauma. So instead, they resort to self-medicating using THC, which doesn't solve the problem at all. It just delays or pushes the feelings off for however long it lasts. So that's a big focus of my meeting with them, is actually getting down to the root cause of why are you having those feelings? Not just addressing the feelings or the coping skills, but the reason why the event that happened, whatever it might be, of why those feelings are there in the first place. So for me, the biggest thing would be openly cooperating in counseling and having counseling available to those youth when they are able and willing to address what has been bothering them.
And then possibly cutting off the source of where they're getting their THC? I know that's a tough one.
Yep.
The other one is I noticed some of the percentages that we are in the state as far as, ranked 11th and 10th and 7th and things like that. How do we move the needle to become in the top 5?
I think that would depend on which area that you're talking about. I know some of them are in the top 5, and that was just the percentage. So what I did is I took the total percentage of referrals for the top 15 populated counties in Wisconsin. So just based off the populations, how many referrals they had, and what the total outcomes were. I think it would really depend on which category we were talking about, and then talking about what other options might be available to address those.
Okay.
And a lot goes
I know
off
we
of-
want to be number 1, but, it's.
A lot goes off the severity of the cases. Sometimes there isn't a whole lot of decision to be made if the actions are severe and it's threatening community safety. There aren't a whole lot of options at that time. So,
Okay, thank you.
yep.
If I could go back to the one piece about prevention, your question. I think social services gave you the side of what they do. I also want to remember, you guys remember Health and Human Services, you have the health department that also comes here, and they've done a lot to address some of the things that Greg talked about. One, on the counseling piece. The Marathon County School-Based Consortium, Counseling Consortium, really was a multi-year, I want to say 5+ year effort to get counseling available in all of the school districts throughout the county. The health department led that initiative after getting a grant to make that sustainable. And I think from my perspective, that's a success. There's actually going to be a presentation, I think, at the Board of Health meeting next week on that program, because it is transitioning to kind of a sustainable model. It's kind of like the county's letting go, at least in some sense, to the bicycle seat as you have your kids. We still provide staff support, but it's, again, largely that's a counselor-based program. Second piece, again, that the health department focusing more on the prevention, keeping people out of the funnel that ultimately Becky and Greg are talking about. We do a lot of work. Our professional within the health department, our health educator around vaping, she's exceptional. And the transition that we're seeing, right, is it's not just THC use, somebody going to one of the local smoke shops and getting glass. It's, I mean, a lot of it is vaping, and it's education around that hits more than simply THC, but I want to make that very clear that it also does target those things. So it's a multidisciplinary approach to Greg's point, and I think going to your last question about, do we always want to be number one? I mean, I always say be careful what numbers can be just numbers, but what do they mean? And do you want to be the county that perhaps defers the most cases? I don't know. I think Kyle would have he's got some thoughts on that from a public safety perspective. There are different, I'll say, community cultures throughout the state of Wisconsin as to what is tolerated and what is a socially acceptable behavior. I mean, you can see throughout the state of Wisconsin, as a former prosecutor, the things that go through court here get a different response than the things that go through court in other places. I won't name counties, but it's just different. So in some, I think what we can say I can say very proudly in Marathon County is we have a lot of options. Depending on what the person, individual youth's needs are, we're in a much better position than a lot of our peer counties throughout the state of Wisconsin. We have options available that, to Greg's point, he pulls the top 15 in terms of population. We have a lot of options that, quite honestly, some larger counties don't have. And we have a lot more options than a lot of the smaller counties. Would we love more options? Absolutely. But I would just say, be careful what you want. Do you want a lot of cases closed really fast? Again, I think Kyle would say it depends on what the case is and how we want to handle it. So hope that additional information is helpful.
So that's one of the things that we discussed, Nico, was diversion programs. Are they working? That would be my first question. Are they actually working? We're diverting kids out of the system. Are they staying in the system even though we diverted them? Are the programs working? Which I'm sure we don't have any of those stats because, if we do diversion, let's say, and they go back into a program, you said we've had some that are 2. Are they still, as an adult, going back into the adult system? I don't know if we have those type of stats. That's one of the stats they want you to look at. And another thing, building off what he was talking about, counseling, sometimes they're talking about, instead of doing counseling, it's called peer-to-peer. We're dealing with kids that are dealing with the same issues they are. They're more comfortable talking with even an adult that has gone some of their, we talked about CHIPS for years, about what they did as a child, what they went through as a child. They don't want to tell somebody that's a stranger. They want somebody that's been and gone through the same things they have to discuss these things with. So those are some of the things that other communities are looking at so that they actually will open up and not use drugs and things like that. Just some of the things that were brought up at those meetings. So.
And I am aware, just to share with you, that they do have peer court at the schools. So when there is a violation at the schools, they are engaging in that sort of peer-to-peer conversation and having their peers hold one another accountable, which they share has been very beneficial. But again, that's before they hit the point of social services. But.
Go ahead, Yi.
Thank you, Mr. and Madam Chair. Really appreciate the presentation. I know we talked a lot about the data, the metrics, and that was presented as well. But I guess what does success look like? Like, what is the example of a successful case? Are you able to tell us what it looks like?
And they work with us. They want to do things better. They want to keep their kid out of the system. They're willing to participate in programming. And truly, we see that youth evolve into a different way of thinking and being while they're with us. And we feel good about their supervision ending. Like, we don't think we're going to see this one come back.
I have 2 more follow-ups. So one, the other follow-up is how many of those cases are we actually seeing? Is it majority of the cases? I don't need specific numbers, but are we seeing quite a few of them? Not a lot?
So for the DPAs, what would you say?
I would say the majority of the DPAs are ending successfully with little recidivism. There are certain cases that the kids do continue to get referrals. Those cases are then referred to court and continued consequences are put into place until they realize I'm done with the consequences. It's time to finally make different decisions.
And I have one final question, and that question is there a single policy that you can point to that the county board has made that resulted in contributing to making your job easier or the success of the students?
Wow, that's a great question. One that I wish I would have had a little time to think about beforehand. I think we've come before the county board various times to talk about various issues. Supporting the YOC is the most recent thing that I can think of that was huge. That's huge support that we believe is going to have really positive outcomes for our youth and for our community.
Thank you.
Can I add to that one? Sure. So, Chair Boots referenced kind of the idea of interrupting the pipeline that has historically worked very well from the juvenile justice system into the adult criminal justice system. That was actually a goal set by the county board in your 2018 to 2022 strategic plan. You set a lot of goals and priorities in that strategic plan document around making sure that every child makes it to adulthood with health, stability, and growth opportunities. A lot of those things drove a lot of the things that we did. I'm putting back my old deputy administrator hat on, and we talked about how to action plan those things. And they do result in staff taking a look at how can we carry out those goals. So I would say yes, absolutely. And it is funding the things you fund through the annual budget, which is your largest policy document you offer. You have funded those things. Youth Opportunity Center on the JJ side, we've changed our delivery model with respect to intensive supervision services. You've given us resources relative to family keys and how do we, I know that's on the CPS side, child protection side, but your Marathon County has been a strong proponent through the budget, through your strategic plans to push toward what I'll say are innovative or leading edge approaches. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, and even though Family Keys seems like it's more on the Child Protective Services side, as I shared with you in the last outcomes presentation, we have enrolled families from Youth Justice into Family Keys and have successfully removed children from out-of-home placement and reunified them because of that program. I also think the only additional thing would be the work around truancy, right? And supporting us to support the schools to have resources for youth who are truant without having to have those youth hopefully come in through the youth justice system, with that being the only concern. So them having the ability to make those referrals to the contracted provider who can then meet with families and try to engage youth in attending school and giving them some incentives for attending has also been a really big benefit for the system itself.
And one other thing, sorry, can't help myself. I know there's sheriff's office staff in the back that operate our secure detention. Perhaps it's a blunt instrument, but not all counties have that. Correct. When we have local youth that need that intervention, for whatever, any of the reasons that Becky and Greg talked about, we have that here. There are not many counties that have that resource locally. It is a blunt instrument. It's perhaps not as appealing from the outside as the Youth Opportunity Center and some of the other things, but it's needed. You need to have it. You need to have that resource, and we're fortunate that we have it locally.
The supervisor hop, and then we're going to jump to the secure detention staff so we can keep moving a little bit, and then we'll come back to questions. But go ahead.
One thing that you haven't mentioned at all is alcohol use. So would that be on an equal playing field as THC? And also, what do you do if you have say a 15 or 16-year-old that's drunk, gets in a car wreck? Would they still be eligible for your program, or would that directly go to the police?
So to answer your first question, what we see is more kids are vaping, and as part of those vapes, they're using THC. Some of them are aware that there's THC in those vapes. Some of them are not, depending on where they're purchasing those vapes. So from my perspective, what I see come through is we do have kids who use alcohol, but it's a lot more THC than alcohol at this point in time. If a youth were 16 and they had a driver's license and they got into a car accident and they were drunk, that will go to the police and will be more of a traffic court situation. They could end up referring that youth for underage drinking to us, and then we would address that issue.
All right, I'd like you to stay right up here because I guess I'd like to turn it over to the security detention staff just to tell us what a normal intake looks when a youth is placed with them at the security detention facility.
Again, real quick, just one thing on the traffic that Supervisor Hoppe brought up. There is a special statute within the juvenile code that if an individual is 16 or older and has a traffic violation, that is an adult court jurisdiction. So that wouldn't go through the juvenile court, that would come in through the adult court. And then there's some other places where the adult court has jurisdiction immediately over the case. Homicide is one of them. So if a juvenile commits a homicide, that would come automatically into adult court, wouldn't go through the juvenile court system. And yeah, and when we talk about juveniles, I guess 17 is considered an adult. So if someone is 17 years old and commits a crime, that comes right to the district attorney's office. It does not go through juvenile court, and it's at the time of the charging. So if someone commits an offense when they are 16 years old and 9 months, and it works its way through the system, by the time it gets ready for reviewing and charging, if they've turned 17, that would then come to our office, not through the juvenile court. So it's at when it's charged, the age that they're charged. Another example of that is allegations of sexual assault. That may be a delayed report where it occurred when they were 15, but it wasn't reported until that individual, the suspect in this case, was now 18. They would come into adult court even though the behavior occurred when they were 15, but it is now being reported when they're over 17. It would come into adult court.
All right, go ahead.
Good afternoon. I'm Jimmy Darjowski. I'm a lieutenant for the Sheriff's Department. I'm currently the superintendent out there, and Becky did a basic overview on how we get all our referrals. We'll get a call from a social worker wanting to place a kid. We'll take down the information on whether it's going to be a sanction, a TPC, and go from there. They would bring us the resident. They would get booked in. If it's a new resident, not adjudicated, they would have a meeting with the social worker the next day and go to court at 2 o'clock. And then pending the outcome of a court order, or they would either be released or stay with us until we hear from the social worker. Otherwise, we're waiting another placement. So.
Okay, I'll open up questions to anyone at this point. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Lance, you're cut off. Sorry.
Sorry, thank you, Chair. I just have a question. What should a parent do if they're having problems with a child before they get arrested? Who could they contact? And, you know, because the parents usually see it before it comes out, before you guys deal with them. And just if somebody actually needed help, where would they go?
They can call us. Greg does a really nice job of talking with parents when they call and they have concerns. He will invite them in for a meeting if it appears necessary at that point in time. They want to come in and they want to talk to us about options. Parents can also file what's called a juvenile in need of protection and services for a youth who's out of control. However, before we will get that youth involved in the court system, because we know once kids get involved in the court system, the outcomes tend not to be as good as we would like them to be. We're going to talk utilized in the community already before we need to bring in more restrictive resources. But they can reach out at any point in time and we'll gladly have that conversation.
Thank you.
Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The other thing I would, give a lot of credit to the Sheriff's Office with the Juvenile Detention Center is Secure Detention Center. It is a big resource, but it's built for a population based on all the things that Becky, Greg, and Krista have talked about. You know, we look at the use of that facility differently than we did 10 years ago in terms of when it's appropriate for kids. Based on all the data and studies that you talked about, you really having the right intervention at the right time, and that's a deep water intervention, generally speaking, the secure detention. So we have worked very diligently, the Sheriff's Office, to maintain that facility, not only for youth in our community that need it, but they've fostered a lot of relationships with other counties to put in contracts in place so that we're not running that facility at a giant financial loss, because if we only had it for our kids and we had to run it, it would be a giant financial loss. So I want to give them a lot of credit for, working with other counties to make sure that they have access to that resource as well, because otherwise you're talking about interventions for youth that are in need that don't exist, certainly in their communities. So Sheriff's Office has done very well there.
And I think the most important thing, and I'll reiterate, is what I'd like to see from staff, and maybe we'll talk about this at Health and Human Services and Gene with Public Safety, is it working? I don't know if we've ever really, we're doing these diversion programs, which they could be doing great, but I guess I don't know that because we've never really discussed what happens after they go to these diversion programs. So say out of 300 some odd cases we talked about, are we seeing 100 people use the system when they turn adult? We don't know those metrics, which is kind of why we do referrals, why we do diversion programs, but are the programs working would be I don't know if we do that right now, to be honest.
Well, you guys can answer the specific questions if we have that data, but that is exactly why the county has moved to kind of have more, has moved to start to collect data, and we're working with, we have one data officer, so her job task has been mighty, and her resources small. But the idea is across all of our programs to identify those key performance indicators of how much of something we're doing, how well we're doing it, and then is anyone better off in terms of impact. Those are the three domains that we're trying to utilize to pull data. And I know our criminal justice system has been where Michael has spent most of her time over the last, she's been here just a bit over a year. I think social services is the next one on the, that kind of health and human services side of the house is next on the list. And I know social services has a lot of data that they can pull from their data systems, EWIS, and others. You guys have anything to add on that?
I can speak to a little bit of the diversion programming and the outcomes that we've seen. So we have truancy diversion, where the schools can have a youth come before the judge. And even prior to coming before the judge, we fund a program at this point in time where the school can refer, it's called Mirror Image, and Mirror Image will work with the youth and the family to identify why that youth isn't going to school. They can help with transportation, and much like Greg talked about with the root cause at his intake, Mirror Image is trying to gain a better understanding of why isn't this youth going to school? What can we do to help overcome that? And as long as they are successful, which our numbers show that they are successful, we see very few JIPs, juvenile in need of protection and service, truancy, that go to formal court. So we know that program is very effective. We know that our restorative justice program had been effective. And that's why we're excited that the city is continuing to look at ways to continue a form of that programming. And then also us at the department looking at how can we possibly move forward that victim and our youth coming together to talk about what happened, because the biggest impact is when the victim understands, why me? Why did you choose to egg my house? Why did you choose to flatten my tires? And sometimes it's just kids walking by a certain house. There's not any real reason, but the victim is scared. They don't understand that. They think that they were targeted. And so that's really important as we move forward and think about whether this is something we can continue to offer. We see good success there.
Supervisor Jong.
Disregard, they answered my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, if not, thank you everyone for presenting. Thank you everyone for being here today. Anything from you, Gene? All right. We'll go to 6, next meeting date and time announcement and future agenda items. Committee members are asked to bring future ideas for discussion. Next meeting for Health and Human Services will be Wednesday, September 3rd at 3 o'clock. Public safety will be Tuesday at September 9th at 1:30. So for the Health and Human Services, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. A motion by Supervisor Zhang. Oh, no, I can't. We're not on our committee.
Yeah.
Oh, you are now. That's right.
He's on both committees.
Both. Supervisor Zhang, do I have a second? Second, Supervisor Cavelli. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned at the Health and Human Services.
Public safety, I need a motion to adjourn. Jason and Nick seconded it. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Public safety is adjourned also. Thank you. It was really an interesting conversation.
Try to get together a meeting, so, or a tour, if anyone's interested.
No, I didn't care.